Okay, so this video I'm just going to go through and create objects and just demonstrate essentially how I'm making these. So we'll use a couple of different modeling tools. I'm primarily just going to do very simple shapes using poly modeling, but for at least one of these I am going to jump into the Nurbs Curves. It's a fantastic way to make sort of more organic flowing type shapes, and what I want to use this for will be to make a sort of pipe. But I'll come back to that. Let's just start by setting up a project, because at the moment I'm in a brand new scene in Maya, and I want everything that I'm making here, I'm going to export into a collection of files. So I'm just going to go into File and go into the project window, and this lets me set a project. So I can say I'm making a new project that I'm going to call, I don't know, let's say Intro to 3D, and picking a location. So here I've selected my location in this projects RT subfolder. And this is a folder that I've selected. I have a projects folder, and in here I've selected within my projects folder I keep all of the various 3D, 2D, whatever projects that I'm working on. In here I've created an arty folder for essentially sort of, I couldn't think of a better word, but it's just for little arty experiments. So I've got these sort of Memphis style experiments, and if I make any sort of, I don't know, creative, original, weird, quirky things, I might just throw them into this folder. It doesn't really matter how you format it, your folder structure, but you want to get in the habit of organizing all of your work. You'll end up, as a 3D artist or any artist, you're a digital artist, you'll end up building a big collection of projects. I don't need to go any further. I'm just saying select, and what I've called the project, it will create a folder in there, and it will make all of these subfolders. Now if I know that I'm not going to use certain ones, I could come through, for example, I'm not going to use clips, I could come through and delete that if I want, and it won't make that subfolder. At the same time, it doesn't matter if it just makes a bunch of extra folders, so I'm not going to worry about what to delete and what to leave. Let's just go with this as default. So hit accept, and jumping into Windows, you can see what it's done. It's created in my projects folder under the RT folder. It's made a whole new folder called Intro to 3D, and if we take a look, we've got a default workspace that it uses to set up what sort of workspace we're using, and all of those folders that we've just created. So in here, the scenes folder is typically where you'll be saving your project scenes. So I can say here, File, Save Scene As, and you can see right now it's showing me a list of folders that belong to the current project, which is this RT Intro to 3D. And so it takes you straight to the workspace root, and just by going File, Save As, it's taking me into the scenes folder automatically. So here I'll call it let's just say objects01. Always use a number at the end of your file and get in the file name, and get in the habit of incrementally saving. So I'll save this as 01, and when I'm ready for my next save, I'll go File, Save As, and change this to 02. So I save this, and we can see now it's created that file within this Intro to 3D folder. So that's basically how projects work, pretty straightforward. What I want to do is start by, let's say, a sort of zigzag shape. I'm not going to get too complex with these. I'll go to, actually before I jump to the front, so if I select my object and hit the move tool, so W, we can see Y is the green, is up and down, and Z is depth. So if I look at it this way, this is X. I can see X is changing, so I'm currently looking in the front view. So I know that this face is the side. So here in the front view, I can start extruding. So we can come into the modeling toolkit, hit extrude, and we can see what I've done. I've just hit W to get the move tool. So I can move this around only because I'm in the front view and I can't see depth. It doesn't give me access to Z, which is depth. So I can only move it in the Y and the X. If I jump back to the perspective, we can see what's happened. So that's probably the first thing you need to be thinking about as best practice, is always model so that the front of your object is facing the front of the scene and the side of your object is facing the side of your scene. Now what I'm going to do, jumping back to the front view, before I move any further, I want to start manipulating this object from the front view. So by drag selecting, so starting outside of the object and dragging to encompass all of these verts, and I've held down the right mouse and gone into vertex mode. This lets me, jump back to perspective, you can see this lets me select all of the verts because I've been at this sort of angle and selected all of these. That's the same as selecting this face. Whereas in face mode I can't really select that side face, so it's just easy to go into vertex mode and select all of those verts. What I want to do here is start snapping this to the grid and use the grid to my advantage. So if your grid is turned off, make sure you click on this button here, the grid, in the viewport, which lets you see the grid. And these little magnets, they're icons of magnets, are called snapping. So this snaps the selected object to what mode we're choosing. And the very first one is a picture of a grid. So with this turned on, and you'll know that it's turned on, or some sort of snapping is turned on, because you've got a little circle. Notice that this has changed from a square to a circle. It's just a little sort of visual reminder. And with it turned on, it now snaps. If I just have those verts selected, it'll snap exactly to the grid cross section. If I have them all selected, you can see it's going into the center. And the reason it's doing that is because it's averaging, it's finding the middle distance between these, and that's where my pivot is, and it's snapping that pivot point. So that's actually what I want. So I'm just going to snap this one here, this one like this, and let's see, I'll just move these out. I'll create, I think that's a good shape, so we'll go 1, 2 up, and then 1, 2 down. And jumping back to my perspective, so again I'm changing views by holding down space, holding down my left mouse and clicking front or perspective. I'm literally just jumping between the front and the perspective. Notice that the front is at the bottom, perspective is at the top. You get very familiar with those pretty quickly, which means I can jump between them by very quickly like this. It's quite gestural. So I hold down space, hold down left mouse and decide which view I want. So that's very quick, and I don't think that's any slower than, in fact I think that's quicker than having to tap space, figure out which view you want to be in. Oh, it's over here, tap space again, tap space, can't appear and tap space. I guess this is pretty quick. Personally I just really like to maintain in a full view, select what I want, do that. It's nice and quick and easy. I think most people do it this way. Alright, so let's extrude another face. Just bring this out, W. I'm just going to hit G to repeat that extrude. And we'll just repeat this a few times. So G to repeat that extrude, G, G. And just keep repeating that a few times. Let's see, do I want to end? I think I'll end it with pointing upwards, so it starts down and ends up. Looks fine. And now we need to clean this model up. So I'll turn off snapping, I'm not using that anymore. And I'm going to duplicate with Control D. Duplicate. If you forget, edit, duplicate, Control D. Just because I'm going to experiment, I might do one more, Control D, make a couple of these. Let's see, what I want to do, I want to smooth this. This will look a lot nicer. So I hit 3 to smooth preview. That's not what I want. It's far too organic. So in this case, I actually want the entire model beveled because I want to retain all of the sharp edges. So this is an easy one. I don't actually need to select anything. I should just be able to click bevel and then decide my fractions. Now notice it's a little bit tricky because I'm not beveling specifically visible edges. I'm beveling this model in object mode and I can't see the edges very easily. So this is where it's nice to turn on my wireframe on shaded. So here, these buttons let us change. We can click the first one, which is wireframe, and the shortcut for that is clicking the 4 key, and 5 takes us back to shaded, so 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded. But what I actually want to do here is turn on my wires and shaded mode. So it's just clicking this button. I need to be in shaded mode to see this, and then click the wireframe on shaded button here, which lets me easily see my geometry. And now dragging this, it's a bit quick. I always find that annoying. I like to hold down Control and click and drag on the word, and it's nice and slow. And I'll just increase. Oh, that's way too high. I just want 2 divisions there, and I'll hit 3, select it and hit 3, and I'll turn off my shaded now so I can see, turn off my wire on shaded, and we can see this model looks a lot nicer than this model purely because of these softer edges. But hitting 3, that's just a preview. It's not actually smoothing this object, it's just previewed. I just hit Q there to close out my bevel, get in the habit of exiting what you're doing by hitting Q. And what I want to do now is actually smooth my model. So I'll just go into Mesh, Smooth, and this gives me options to change the number of divisions. And 2 actually looks pretty nice. Well, there's a little bit of artifacts on the corner there, so I'll do that again, and I'll just go to 3. 4 is probably acceptable, but 3 is fine. That looks great. So that's one piece done. Hit Q to get it out of that tool. Okay, so this one, I want to do the same sort of thing, but this time I want to maintain the softness. So I want to keep the sharp edges, but I want the center pieces, instead of creasing here, to be soft like this. So what I'm going to do now is go into edge mode, so hold down the right mouse and select edge, double click on a single edge, and it selects that whole loop. And now I want to hold down shift and double click on each other loop, and the very ends. I want to select all of these corners at the end. Quickest and easiest way to do that is hold down both shift and control, which adds to my selection without accidentally deselecting. So I'll just undo that. If I held down shift, that selects what I want, but it will then deselect this. And it wouldn't be that big a deal. I can hold down shift and just add to that selection again. But it's much easier just to go shift control, grab those guys, just hit F to focus so my orbit's not all out of whack. And that's looking like what I want. So let's hit bevel, it should work. I'll give it 2 segments, I think. And the fraction, hit 3 to see how it looks. That's about what I want. I might make that a bit more dramatic though. So I'm happy with that. I'll hit Q to close that tool. I'm going to delete this one. I duplicated. I'm only wanting the 2 of these, will be fine. But what I want to do now is just work on this one. Anytime you have multiple stuff in your scene, you can isolate just the object that you want to focus on. So if I select this object, and this button here, it's a little, hover over, it says isolate select. So this little sort of dotted square with a cursor. When I click that, it hides everything else. I'm going to go into the front view. And what I'll do now is go into, hold down right mouse and go to vertex. And I'll just drag select all of the ones at the top. And I might use snapping. I'm just going to make it a little bit more dramatic. And so back to perspective, let's hit 3. And so we can see what sort of result we get. I'm liking the look of these. I'm not too happy with the ends. So what's happening here? Let's try just inserting loops through the corners. So what I'll do is just selecting my objects. I'm in the habit of getting into object mode just so I don't have that currently selected objects. Multi-cut tool, which will automatically put me into vertex, edge, and face mode. So these multi-components, or this section here in the modeling toolkit, is the same as going into face, edge, vertex. So in multi-cut, I'm going to move my cursor over here and hold down Control and hold down Shift to try and snap it to the center. It moved at the last second, so just Control Z and try again. Okay, now I just want to hit 3. It's not quite having the effect I was after, but I'll just do the same down this end. So aiming for the center. If I'm struggling to get that exact, I can always just, with my multi-cut options, just type in 50, and now when I hold down Control and Shift, the only option is to snap to the exact center. So that makes it a bit easier. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. So this is giving me control loop that forces this to come into this shape, and now I just want to bring these ends up. So I'm just going to go into Vertex, and I'll drag select carefully, just drag selecting this corner. And when I say carefully, I mean so that I don't accidentally grab any verts from up there. And same here, so holding down Shift, drag selecting these ones, just orbiting around, double checking I haven't selected something I didn't want to select. I'm going to jump to the front view, hit W, I'll turn off grid snapping, and I'll actually hit 3 and do this in smoothed mode. Of course, if I drag them both up, we're going to get, this will go in the right way, but this won't. What I'll do is just drag select these ones and turn snapping back on and just snap it up 1. Grab this one and snap it down 1. And so with this smooth preview, we can see that's coming together a bit better. It is forming a little bit of a sort of upwards. We can see this line up here is a bit higher than it should be. Even though it's exactly aligned with these, when it's non-smooth, when we smooth it, this peak is changing, and it's because of this subdivision. So I should be able to quickly clean that with the multi-cut tool, just by having this snap set to 50. It's going to be real quick to, I'll do this in perspective, just hold down Control and just, Control and Shift, and just insert an edge in the exact center along each one of these. And so now when I hit 3, jump to the front view, they're all exact same height. And this is roughly in the middle. It's not really, actually let's just fix that. Vertex mode, grab these, W, I'm just going to turn off snapping. I'll hit F to focus on this and zoom out a touch. I'm just trying to align these with this grid shape. I'm not being super precise. There are better ways to do this with being a bit more precise, but it's going to be so close that we won't really tell the difference. So now if I come into object mode, hit F to focus, and we can see these are pretty much the same distance in the exact center. And it's all nice and clean, looks pretty good. That's the shape that I was after. So I'm going to hit 1 to get out of my subdivision, and again we'll smooth. Let's give it 2 subdivisions, let's go 3 again. And it's quite a nice looking little squiggly line. So I'm just going to save this. I'll turn off my isolate select so we can see we've got our 2 types of squiggly lines. And of course I can change this. When I'm bringing this into the scene down the track, it's going to be easy to squish it and do whatever we want. But it gives us a nice baseline. So File, Save Scene as Objects 2. So incremental save. Alright. Now what I might do is start exporting some of these objects. So I've saved this scene so I know I haven't lost them if I accidentally get rid of them. One thing that can be annoying is when your pivot point, so this gizmo, 3D gizmo, is not centered. So with my object selected, I want this centered. I'm just going to go into Modify, Center Pivot. So it's snapped to the center. I could do that again by hitting G, or just to show you again, Modify, Center Pivot. And so what I'm going to do now is just export these models. So File, Export Selection, and I'll go with FBX, so that's the Autodesk format, and call this one something that I can identify by the name. So squiggly line, maybe 01 in case I end up making several of them. I'm using the camel case naming system, so when you name something in more complex computer software, avoid having spaces and weird shapes and weird numbers, ASCII characters in your file name, so that you reduce the chances of things going wrong. All the spaces and weird characters that we're used to in operating systems are handled by the operating system. They're not necessarily working nicely with various software. So it's best practice to get in the habit of naming things nicely. So squiggly line 01, this is going to be an FBX file, export selection. Now, if you don't have that option, when you come in, I'll export this one. When you go File, Export Selection. So I'm not exporting all, I'm exporting one by one, selecting what I want, File, Export Selection. If you don't have the FBX option, it's because you need to activate the plugin. So just go Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. It'll pop up this Plugin Manager window, and then if I type in FBX, we can see here the FBX Maya plugin is loaded, and you probably want to auto load this so it's always there. So make sure that that's active. So with the, I guess, sharp, maybe I'll call this one zigzag line. This is squiggly line, this is zigzag line. So File, Export Selection. I can see there's the squiggly line and zigzag. Export Selection. And I'll just go New Scene. I've already saved Objects02, so I didn't need to save that again. And let's just import them and double check that that's working. Nice and easy. So File, Import, Import. And I'll do both of them. Sorry, it only lets me do one at a time. So squiggly line, that's fine. File, Import, zigzag line. So this is how you can go about importing objects separately. So I'll just delete those. So I'm working in a brand new scene, and I'll make a new shape. This time, let's use our curves. And what I'll do is go to the front view, and using the grid, doesn't actually matter if I use the grid. I won't snap to the grid. I just want to make a curvy shape, and I'll do this going into Create menu. This is the same place we can come down to selecting, creating our polygons. We're going to do the same thing here by using Nurbs, but before I use Nurbs, I'm going to use the curve tools. We have shortcuts to these curve tools around here. Bezier curve tool, editing curves, EP curve tool. It's the same as going create curve tools, and I might go EP curve tool. I'm just going to click on this little square to open the settings and just double check what I'm set to. 3, yep, so that's good. So resetting the tool, so it's set to 3, and I'm just going to click and drag. I'm not at all concerned about what sort of shape I make, really. Just sort of demonstrating a concept. And hit enter. So if I come back to perspective, you can see that's made a 2-dimensional curve. I can adjust this if I decide I don't like it. I click on the curve, hold down the right mouse on the curve, select the control vertex, and now I can drag select or click select these verts, hit W, and it lets me make adjustments. So I can make little adjustments until I get the desired shape, whatever that may have been. That's good enough. Back to object mode. Now what I want to do is turn this into a pipe, and I'm going to use a feature called Extrude. So it's very similar to our extruding polys. We're going to do this with the Surfaces tool, and we have an extrude feature here. Now the way this works is I need to tell it what to extrude. So I'm going to create a circle. So again, interactive creation. If you want it to appear in the world origins, under your settings, you need to make sure that this is unchecked. And I'm just going to move it over here. It doesn't actually matter where it's sitting, but it is slightly too large. I might want it a little bit smaller. And now the way this works is I'm saying I want this shape extruded all the way along the shape of this curve. And to do that, just hit Q, so I'm using my select tool instead of accidentally moving things. To do this, I select my curve, the shape that I want to extrude first, and then I hold down Shift and select the path that I want that extrusion to follow. So your circle needs to be white, the path needs to be green. And with these both selected, I come into Surfaces, Extrude, and I'll come into the options. And we basically want all of these settings on the right. So I'm following the path. I want the pivot around the components it's selecting, normal profile. Now down here, I want this to become polygons. So we're going to stick with polygons for this, and I want it to be quads. And instead of playing with these, I'll just select count and crank that up to 1,000. So it's going to make a tube of 1,000 polygons. I'll hit apply and let's see what it does. So it's a bit squishy through the center there. Now this is still live. So what that means is I can select this curve on the inside, come into the vertex mode and start making adjustments. So if I decide that's not quite the shape, basically there it's not handling the shape that I wanted. And I could certainly play around with the settings to get that, if that is the exact shape that I want, to get it to behave a bit nicer. But I kind of like that it's squishing and is a little bit more organic. I didn't want it to be too mechanical, artificial, so it's kind of cool. I might actually increase some of the squishiness. I think down here we could really get that thin through there and get this, so it's sort of going thick and then thin and then thick and then thin. I don't know, just experimenting with weird shapes. So that kind of works. Alright, so now if I want to lock this in, at the moment, because it's still live, if I select my model, or not the model, sorry, if I select the curve and move it, the model moves with it. If I select the circle and move, the whole thing distorts and acts really funny, which is actually kind of cool. But anyway, not what I want to demonstrate. What I'm trying to show here is that we need to break this, the fact that it's live, which is just a matter of, it doesn't matter what I have selected for this. It's going into my scene and saying File, Edit, Delete All by Type, History. So now when I've gotten rid of that history, and now nothing's live. I might just make another one. I'll just grab that curve and move it over. So select the circle, shift select this curve, and we'll go into, actually I might make a new curve. Let's get a different shape. Oops, front view, and I'll use the EP curve. I'm just holding down shift to snap it vertically. So what I want to demonstrate is if I do want fairly sharp curves, I just need to make sure I'm giving it enough control points to maintain its shape. object mode. So selecting this circle, shift selecting this curve, let's just drag it over here. It doesn't get confusing too much. I'll turn off my grid for now. So my curve is green, which means it's the last one selected. So extrude. Now I've got the same settings. If I just hit apply, you can see it's maintained these forms a lot nicer. What I might do is Control Z. So let's just increase the poly count and double it 2000 and hit apply. So with this higher resolution, you can see, I'll just hit F to focus, and looking at how this is drawn, it's created a lot more, many more subdivisions. So the circular shape that it's created is higher resolution than the other one, which looks like six-sided. Just wondering if I want to smooth them. So 3 and 1. There's not much difference actually. What about this one? 3, 1. Yeah, I think this one I do, just because it's that six-sided circle is a bit low res. So I'll go mesh and smooth, and single subdivision should be fine. Hit Q to get out of that. There's a little bit of pinching through there, whereas that smooth cleans that up. So we'll subdivide this one too. Okay, so export selection, and so we can see if I come into the scenes folder in this project folder, all of these FBX files have been created. So I'm just in a new scene here, and I might just make a couple more very, very simple objects. I'd like to make, let's see, maybe not a cube, let's go with a cylinder. And we'll come into the channel box, and I might just reduce poly count there. So double click both of those loops, bevel, 2 segments, and holding down Control and clicking on the word fraction and hitting 3, so that gives me a nice solid edge when we smooth it. Hit Q, and so what I'll want to do is make a little lip down the bottom, and let's see, I'll use multi-cut, and I'll go to edge mode, select this edge, and now double click on this edge. And because I clicked this one first and then double click this one, it continued, when I double clicked it, it continued the loop all the way around. And because it's a nice smooth, unbroken loop, that goes quite cleanly. And what I want is to change this selection to faces. So now if I hold down Control and go to faces, holding down Control and the right mouse to faces, that's one way of quickly selecting the faces. Another way would have been to simply go into face mode, drag select. Both do the same thing, but just quickly repeating that, just in case you may not be in such a simple way, maybe that's in an angle and drag selecting isn't quite so easy. Just basically selecting one edge, double clicking the next one, selects the loop, hold down Control, hold down the right mouse, and go to faces. So when I hold down the Control and hold down right mouse, that lets me change the selection. This is the same as coming into select. Let's say, for example, I've select this edge, double click this one to select all of these. I can go into select and go to convert selection, and you can change whatever you've got selected to different modes. So two vertices or 2 faces, which is what I've just done. So I'm just showing you the shortcuts that I'm in the habit of using. So in any case, I've got just these faces selected. I hit F to check. It's a good habit. Let's say I accidentally had a face up here selected. If I think I've only got these ones, I can hit F. And the fact that this is focused on the entire model tells me, well, I haven't just selected these, there's something up here. Whoops, undo that, hit F. Hit F, and it's focusing on just what I want. So with these selected, I'm going to extrude. And I'll just do it by dragging, holding down Control and slowly dragging here. That's probably about what I want. Now I'm going to go to edge mode, double click this loop and these loops. Don't know if I want this rim or not down here. It's kind of cool. Anyway, for now we'll stick with what I've just selected. I will keep this loop, and because I'm going to keep it, I'll double click all of these edges and the inside. Yep, so it's this little lip. And so the reason I'm selecting these is that when I smooth them, I mean, it's not bad, it looks kind of cool, but I want them to be this sort of hard-edged. So I'll bevel and pick a very small fraction. I might just leave that on one segment because it gives it quite a nice smooth. So I'm just in smooth preview, I'll hit 1 to get out of that. And Q. So hit 3 and unselect, and we can see the kind of weird, wonderful shape we've made. I'm not entirely sure what any of this is. It's just some random shapes. I'm showing you a few different techniques for making this stuff. Let's just export this. Actually, sorry, I have to smooth it. So let's just smooth previewed, hit 1. Let's go mesh smooth. And I think 1 division, no, let's make that 2 divisions. So I can just click off it. Because I haven't hit Q to get out of my tool, I'm still in the smooth mode, so I select it, and I can still change these if I want. That was a bit much. I think 3 though is quite reasonable. Yep. So just hit Q now and it closes that smooth and locks it in. File, export. Actually, let's just check where our pivot point is. Yeah, that's centered. Export selection. And we'll call this, it's kind of like a pipe, isn't it? Just call it cyl for cylinder. I know what that means. Delete. I haven't actually deleted anything, it's still here. It's worth double checking that you've done that correctly, but I'm confident that that has exported. I'd like to make just a couple more very simple shapes. Just a cube. Basically I just want to smooth the cube, and if we smooth it at the moment it's terrible, so I don't need to select any edges. I'm going to smooth the entire thing. So bevel the entire thing. Let's say 2 divisions. I'll hit 3. Yeah. I might make that a bit larger. Yeah, that's better. Kind of like a dice. So smooths nicely, so let's mesh smooth. I'll do 2 divisions. Doesn't make a big difference really. Yeah. So 3 looks good. Export selection. And just call that cube. Probably got enough to go with now. I might make 1 more shape. It'll just be good to have a bit of a... so starting with a cube, some sort of polygon type shape. So I've just held down the right mouse, selected an edge and just dragged it up. And I might select this one and come down a fair bit. I'll go on the face mode and drag this out. And I was about to drag it in, that works just fine, but you could also just scale in object mode. Doesn't really matter. So I like this shape, but I'd like it to be... I like a small lip around the bottom, so let's use multi-cut and insert a simple edge loop. And what's happened there? Okay, so because this object is elongated, it's not cutting smoothly. What I'll do is go into the front view, and here we go, I've modeled this in the right view. What I want to do is use my multi-cut tool to slice all the way through the model. So by starting my cursor out here and clicking and dragging all the way through to the other side, and now holding down shift so that it snaps. Okay, so I'm just coming back and undoing that. I want to set this back to 10. So now I'm starting here, dragging to the other side of the model, so going all the way through the model. And now when I hold down shift, it's snapping, so it's nice and flat. And let go. Hit Q to get out of that tool. Come back to perspective, hit F to focus. What we can see is that's done a perfect line. So that method ignores whatever angle you're at, and whatever angle the geometry is at, it'll just cut straight through, which is convenient. I'll go to face mode, just select this face and double click this face, which should give me that whole loop. So another shortcut. It's obviously shorter than before when I went through the edges, but again, I'm trying to show you a bunch of different techniques. I'll extrude these a touch. Just clicking on thickness, I only want to come out a little bit this time. And edge mode, let's bevel these. Now this time I want to bevel, I actually want to bevel everything. Before I proceed though, what I'd like to do, just going to experiment with this edge. Let's bevel just this edge, make the fraction really large. I'll start just slightly above the very end down here, and then increase the segments a fair bit. Thank you. So I just wanted to create a little bit more of an organic shape here at the bottom, but coming up to a pointy top. And now what I want to do is select all of the edges. I want to bevel everything except for those ones I've just made. So I'm just going to orbit, keeping it straight on so I'm not at a weird angle. What I want to do is deselect this section, so I'm just going to hold down Control, drag select through there. So that's unselected these. Actually looking under here, I don't want, just going to hold down shift and go through and just deselect these ones and the other end. I don't want to bevel those, but I do want to bevel that and everything else. That should work quite nicely, so let's bevel and give it maybe 2. It's not going to let me do a dramatic fraction, but now if I hit 3, obviously this looks a bit weird, but if we deselect it, it's not too bad. We're getting a little bit of pinching through there that I'm not super happy with, but that's easy to fix. That's basically the shape I was after, just a strange little standing thing. So let's fix, I hit 1 to get out of my preview, and let's just fix these. Be concerned about these. I'll drag select and hit F and zoom out a touch. So I've got this loop really close to each other. I'm going to just hit edge, double click to select that whole loop all the way around the model, and go into edit mesh, delete edge vertex, which is Control Delete. So now that's gone. If I zoom in down here, we don't have that mess. So now I hit 3, it's a bit better. I'd like this edge through here to be a little sharper, so what I'll do is double click that edge, just hit 1 to get out of that preview, and I want to bevel just this edge, double checking that goes all the way around. Hit F, and you can see it goes all the way around the model. I'll just zoom in on the corner a bit so I can see what I'm doing. Let's hit bevel and holding down control, click dragging on the word. I want that fraction quite small and maybe just 2 divisions. Whoops, object mode. And so that's created that sharp edge that I was after. I just wanted a nice little sharp edge at the bottom there, but everything else kind of soft. So that's pretty cool. So let's smooth it. Mesh. Actually, I just want to double check. I haven't looked up here too closely. Drag select this top bit and hit F to quickly focus up here. Just concerns. Does look a little... It's such a sharp corner that there's a potential for issues, especially with your normals going in strange directions. So I just wanted to have a close look. We are getting a bit of an issue here with the normals, but hopefully when I smooth this object, it won't carry over. So let's take a look. Select it, mesh, smooth, and I'll probably need a couple of divisions on this one. Let's try 4. And that's quite nice. We're not seeing those artifacts at the top at all. It's quite sharp. That's pretty clean. Great. So I'm happy with that. Hit Q to lock it in, and I might just reset my pivot, modify center pivot. Now, I don't actually like my pivot up there. I kind of want it on the exact base. So if we look at it from an orthographic view on the side, what I can do to change this is hold down D. D, you can see in the move settings in my modeling toolkit, says edit pivot. So I can just click this button. I'm in the habit of the keyboard shortcut, so I hit D or edit pivot. This lets me change my pivot point. So for example, I brought it out here. That's now where the pivot point lives. This is useful at times. I could bring it down here. Whoops, undo. Be careful not to rotate it or have it at a weird angle. If I brought it down here, what this would let me do, if that's turned off, so I'm back into normal mode, it's very useful because it lets me rotate from that position. So I could have it laying down sideways if I wanted. If I wanted to be more accurate, what I can do is turn edit pivot on, so I'm moving the pivot again, and snap it. This one here lets me snap to points. So now it's going to snap to specific points on my model. I'm just clicking and dragging and it's snapping. I can say I want it right down to the leftmost corner. Turn off snap to points, and so that gives me a pivot down there. Let's export this and call that a day, and now we'll go into rendering.